What?
To be problem of the fuck thing.
Yeah.
And I'm still busy with this. Is that fucking is a nice thing. And we are using it as a pejorative. And I think somehow maybe this should be one of the tasks of cyber community or digital community to change this thing, you know, like to try to change this like fuck off thing to.
I agree. I think that you talked about monoculture, and it was not something I talked about, so it's very good you addressed it. There is like, but when you talk about monoculture in that way, you focus on what has been lost and less on what has been gained. Mm-hmm. And you also still have that ideal of autonomy. And like I said, I don't really believe in independence as such, which is a sort of autonomy. And then going back to monoculture and the opposite, what is that, pluriculture, or biodiversity, if it's biological terms. And there is James Lovelock, the Gaia theorist, that has just become more and more important. And he's grown older and wilder in his head ever since his first interest in how the Earth develops since the 60s, and it's difficult actually to keep up with him, because the last book I read, I think he published it in 2014, and I see he's just published a new one, but it's an anthology. But what he's saying is that in the last book, 2014, more or less, he's saying, so everybody focuses on loss of biodiversity. What about the increase in biodiversity? It might not be the biodiversity we like, but there is also, like he's saying, there are new viruses. You know, viruses, they have a name, and you can see they have a number. And when you see the number of that virus, you can see, oh fuck, there have been many viruses before that virus. And there are new bacteria, and there are various new organisms, and I'm not an expert on this topic, but he's talking about, so a new sort of hybrid, biotechnospherical, I would say, biodiversity. And there are also things that, if we're not going to say they have been gained or they're gained, then at least they have come into being. And something comes into being, there are also new possibilities maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I agree, and I don't want to, maybe I should have insisted a little bit more in the presentation, but I'm not nostalgic of what has been lost. Mm. What I'm trying to point out is sort of this notion of monoculture, is that we are just operating under a certain dominant ideology with less and less room to be able to navigate and to create alternatives. Mm. So when I'm talking about cultural diversity, I'm talking about the reduction of this field of possibilities, not about diversity as a sort of absolute measure, because indeed that you are true, it's completely correct, that even within the scale of this monoculture, if you look even at platform-centric artistic practices, there is a plethora of things being done. It's very rich, but the spectrum has been reduced, and the control of the spectrum has been taken out.
Infrastructurally speaking.
Yeah. But
formally and maybe not content-wise.
No, content-wise, because you see, there is, even in the performance here, you see like a third of the content was related to Twitter. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of unconscious brainwashing. I don't want to sound rude or anything, but something that is influencing artistic practices beyond consciousness. And that's the thing I'm a bit concerned about. So it's a little bit like the sort of the Dutch cheese metaphor.
Bring it on, bring it on. I know the French cheese. I know the French cheese. The Charles de Gaulle.
It's like very relevant.
So the point that I have with Dutch cheese is that there are not so many Dutch cheese. You know, you have a type of Dutch cheese. And it took me many, many years to appreciate this diversity. in fact, between very young cheese and very old cheese, there is a term of flavor, there is a lot of differences, and you can start to learn to appreciate. But then you go back to France, or to England, or to Italy, then you have different type of shit. Your flavors are radically different. And that's the kind of diversity I'm talking about. But absolutely, within a very narrow spectrum, you can still have infinite possibilities of diversity. But the range of spectrum has been extremely reduced by today's technologies and services available for network communications.
Yeah. I would like to bring back the question of scale that I was posing. Because I think it's kind of crucial, and with the independent publications, it's also been quite present. Because when you move in a monoculture environment, there can also be some positive aspects. But, just throwing out nostalgia about whatever has happened before, what it's missed usually, it's diversity, not in terms that there should be 1 million different shades of it, but it's the possibility of having smaller groups that then can create autonomously and interact with other smaller groups. So having a plethora of different smaller cultures that move completely out the smaller cultures somehow.
We're talking about social cultures.
Social cultures.
Right.
So the social, exactly, the social dimension, I personally feel is the one that is usually just missed, just not considered, forgotten. It's just not there. And that's because
There is a lack of cultural diversity, you're saying.
yeah, but it's
Diminishing
more,
cultural diversity.
cultural diversity, it's quite vague as a term. But the social impact, it's something that's missed because we are getting more and more used to move into standard, completely global environments. So the Twitter, Facebook, whatever platform, or the worldwide politics. What I feel personally it's missed, not in terms that it used to be, but in terms of how it can be now. It's doing or instigating something that can have a direct impact somehow, even on a very small scale. But to do that,
What do you mean by direct impact?
by direct impact, I mean that you start to think about how you can affect, how a small number of people can affect their respective lives. So they could go together for whatever purpose they want, and they start to think about what kind of purpose they can, what kind of goals they can have all together. So they cut out temporarily from the perspective, which is that they have to impact on a big scale.
That's a democratic problem.
But I think that it's somehow that, I don't know, I'm busy with same things, but from a different entrance, I have to say. Like since Hobbes' Leviathan, we know, and I don't know if I believe that, we don't make decisions according to rational judgment, but according to desire. And this was very much vivid during 99% movement. On one hand, this like ability, and because of like digital environment to gather people was like enormous. It was a proof of a super strong like digital grassroots movement. But what 99% movement showed was that basically it was a festivity. And this is what I mean, Hakim Bey writes about it, that the revolt is a voluptuous festivity, and that's enough.
You have a problem with the spectacle.
But
Because, no, I don't. Because when people gather in a cold room, they change the temperature of the room just because of their temperatures.
yeah.
And this is, I think it's important enough. This kind of like the physical gathering, the impact of the physical gathering with a different consciousness, but with the consciousness of this desire. The desire of 99% movement of these people who came there was a festivity.
So the question would be,
But it was important for Bernie Sanders. It was important for a lot of political things that had happened afterwards.
Yeah,
Even though it was suggestive.
the problem is impact.
That's the changing of the rule.
Okay.
My metaphor would be, it was a national festivity.
So there is no direct impact, but then there are secondary fruits.
Oh yeah,
Which are extremely important.
Probably, I would say.
But what if it's not a national festivity, but it's a family festivity? Again, scale.
It's great enough. No? Isn't it?
I mean, it could be, it's great enough, but then the relationship is much stronger, and the aim for being just a festivity is overcome by the relationship that almost spontaneously happen among the members. Because the member can see each other and can recognize each other. I mean, the question of scale, again, it's what I'm trying to bring back, because I think it's something that is progressively missed as a mental dimension. I mean, banally, we can argue about the aim to have a higher number of followers, a higher audience, a higher perceived impact on anything we do. And instead of starting back to think, okay, what can I do in this specific broken wall, which is just in front of here? It's completely ignored at the moment. Or what can I do with the people who are living in my same building? It's something that we are, especially, it's
That's all community that has been replaced by network, so there is another collectivity or collectivism that is happening now.
yeah, but what kind of collectivity?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would like to add to that because it has a lot to do with the psychology that is at the root of these networks, and the psychology or that's at the root of these groups, gangs or families, specific situations. And that's actually quite interesting on the level of manipulation. So in a small group, it's quite easy, or comparatively easy, to get a sense of enthusiasm, but actually to experience empowerment
On a small scale.
on a small scale. Yeah, because but that's part of it, because you realize you can make small changes, but you can actually make them. That's what you can do.
We're sitting next to Christiania where we have small change, but the impact is rather minimal.
Yeah, but when you trace the history of mafia, it started like that.
Yeah, for a company that was missed.
So it very much depends on like tools,
We're
strategies.
talking about the same
you
thing.
know.
Yeah, that's true. But is the reminder is that somebody that leads, and that's typical in that kind of social organizations. It's, leads in terms that stands as a more powerful entity, but then people delegate the power they have.
Capo di tutti.
Yeah.
Okay. And rabbi and grand
No,
rabbi.
what I'm talking about is something different. I mean, I would like to bring an example, maybe banal, and unfortunately still connected with the publishing thing, and this time about libraries, finally. I've experienced, I've bumped into this small phenomenon, especially in US and South America, of do-it-yourself libraries. So there are groups of people, each can be 5 or 20, who just decide to share their own collection. So they rent collectively a room, a few tables, put all their valuable stuff there, and it's a closed environment. So I'm not talking about creating a public service. That's totally not private. It's not public, it's private. But they decide to share resources all together because they found it as something which is valuable for everybody. And it's not only about the books. In that case, it's about sharing the space, sharing the knowledge that is around it.
So you want to go small scale?
Possibly.
Wow. Climate scale, that's climate change, that's big scale. Or like, we have massive problems that you cannot solve in these small bubbles.
Yeah, we can't solve them because if we... Well, okay.
If we don't talk politics, but that's politics, we can also talk art, I don't know. It's
No,
supposed two different things. I don't know if
I'm not saying that we shouldn't address problems on a big scale, but
You can only make these changes at a higher level if you start a motion at a lower level. So it's bottom up in that sense. And you can put it how we want, direct democracy or radical politics or bottom up politics. But it all comes down to the situation where you need to start figuring out how to fix things in the local political realm before it can affect the rest. If you start to address directly the sort of the bigger thing, you are only wasting time on the symptoms. You haven't fixed yet.
So you wouldn't go for the European Union and United Nations?
no, that's a different level. It's not one denying the other. It's that level you can't just avoid because it's just
speaking about the climate change and such a question. There is no answer on lower strata because bare life people, like majority of people, is not a reason of ecological devastation. But it's poverty, it's enterprises, and etc. It's China, and etc. etc. So, you know what I mean? It's like there are some questions which you just can't solve.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that everything can be solved, but I mean, we can also see it from a different perspective, which is that we are anyway powerless, since we can't directly influence big decisions, which are kind of running on a different level. I mean, we can affect at a very fraction with our own, singular. But, and this is whatever happens, it's weakening us, because we feel powerless. We feel, sorry to stop, and I agree we should give it a very positive meaning, but we are fucked twice. Once because we can't affect it on a big scale, and second because we can't affect it in any way. That's how we feel. I'm not saying that everything should be reduced on small scale. That's the panacea for everything. But starting to address some of the possible efforts on a smaller scale. And I'm not saying about close the smaller scale, but small groups that could feel to accomplish something, and then could connect with other groups, remaining independent. So the scale remains important in terms to affect directly some small results, but also to regain this feeling of being strongly related to what is surrounding, and not necessarily to entities, can be humans or can be anything, that are all remotely spread.
I think methodologically I see it differently. Like one of the most, overturning crucial concerts of Joy Division, there were 15 people in audience. How is it possible that we all know Joy Division? So,
Sorry.
No. This makes me busy. So Joy Division was not forced to grow itself to the size of U2, but still we know it. It's still like after fucking 30 years, it's horrible for the 30 years. It's important.
So I feel
but I could, no, sorry, and I will stop there. But I would argue that kind of processes involve a specific narrative. If you mention Joy Division, I would ask, what if Jan Curtis would still be alive?
Yes, but I believe that Love Will Tear Us Apart will stay the same, for example. Like this, cult legend which was made by this actually like ecological suicide will not affect the quality of the song.
No, for sure, but would it be so spread and acknowledged and recognized and
It's a hypothetical question, but I think yes.
But I was thinking like monoculture, for instance, it could be, for instance, Google, right? Would that be a concrete example of what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So, for instance, there is the economist Jeremy Rifkin who's saying like, well, break the monopoly, like they broke Rockefeller's monopoly of the railways in the States, of that early infrastructure in the 19th century, so I'm like thinking that would be some sort of like concrete action, but it would need sort of like a massive.
Yeah, but it's the same logic because Rifkin come from this industrial revolution.
Okay.
So he sees, when he wants to break the monopoly, he sees that from the perspective of economic disruption. So you replace the king to become the king instead of the king. It's not what we're talking about here.
So there is nothing to do.
Yes, there's nothing to do. I mean, what we're talking now is actually to figure out how to do things, but
the Rockefeller case was the change of the legislative. So it was done on parliamentary level. And so, of course, there were forces, there were lobbyists, and etc., etc. But actually, the parliamentary level and legislative level, for example, in the US, goes in completely opposite direction. Because since the end of 1980s, you have lobbyists for neocolonialism there, actually. So it's like completely, different paradigm. But it might be, I mean, there might be some, I don't know, structure which can build like ambassadors and grand ambassadors which finally are our prolonged links to parliament. This is not completely utopian.
I would like to.
No, but there should be somebody backing up.
Because I don't want to grow,
I would like to remind the audience that you're actually very welcome to contribute or ask. Because I'm quite aware that since my female speakers have kind of vanished into thin air, we are having this all typical male, all-male panel. And we have already been fucked twice, and so I think that's like.
But never enough.
never.
But what about art? I'm like, often in the art world, when it gets serious, start talking about politics and everything else, and
so it's an open invitation to come in. I think the art question is I'm tempted to answer, but is there a question already? No.
I was just nodding.
To the art.
We can talk more about art.
yeah,
I think the Joy Division question is funny because it sounds like you're actually saying the exact same thing as this guy over here. So those 15 people at the concert were part of a really strong, small group, closed group for a time, and eventually that changed as networks across cities developed, sort of like Velvet Underground or anybody else. Everybody knows them now has a t-shirt, but maybe a onesie for their baby, but like there was a time where Velvet Underground was, there were 4 people there.
Yes,
all trashed
but no one knows about Velvet Underground, and actually it was made as a multimedia show. It was never meant to be a band which makes records. It was like projections and dance and sadomaso and all that. So
right, but in the same way, this DIY library was never meant to solve global warming, but they started to kind of explore information, and then that information gets networked with other places, creating and investigating information, and eventually these smaller, stronger networks kind of connect together to make a more dense global network rather than like all individuals inputting into the same like huge space. There need to be stronger like connections between each.
Yeah,
it's like a brain or something.
But there was no dialectics with Joy Division because 14 people from these 15 people we will never ever know where.
Yeah, but they were communicating with very important artists and very important writers and very important intellectuals. These people are all in communication all the time. I don't think they disappeared after the concert or whatever.
Yes.
I think they played a significant cultural role.
So what I wanted to say that the 15th person in the audience was John Peel, who was the ambassador, who was someone who was honest and influential enough to push it forwards.
Right.
It was broadcasting the BBC. I mean, it's the long hand you were mentioning before,
Yes.
in the parliament. He was the Joy Division long hand in the media system, so somehow for the sessions he recorded.
Yeah.
But
and he wanted to grow, He wanted to be this like media talking head and etc. We don't want, Joy Division didn't want to be that person, that ambassador. But John Peel was a great ambassador.
Yeah, one question would be, where Joy Division enters a kind of cultural resource at some point, to stick with the Joy Division case. They needed to be shared, because they were either interpreting their own time in the best possible way, being symbolic of what was happening in that moment, innovating the music, the rock
And
music.
that's why you have
at the
something
highest
called the underground,
level.
but you no longer have that same concept of
Yes,
underground.
you do. The underground still exists.
Well,
You'll think it's cool in 50 years, same thing, but
Yes, speaking about death grapes and other
I think
things.
there are some cultural logics that have changed a lot.
I don't know. I think the underground still exists, for sure.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the most experimental stuff is happening in the underground, even.
You should go see Smegma tonight.
What?
So you should go see Smegma tonight.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. But I think some cultural logics have, the culture,
Of course,
the
sure.
logic of culture has changed.
But I think that dynamic of a small group that grows
It's
and
pretty
eventually
difficult to stay
services
underground
the same.
when you have Facebook or like. Then you can
No,
get off the grid. And
just
that's,
unuse it if you want to stay
Yeah.
on the ground. It's very simple.
Maybe Facebook is the new John Peel or something.
Well, there's other ways to document this. It's more, you know, you named a concert, I assume. Right?
Yeah, well, it's
So-
a musician.
So there's going to be videotaping and photographing of that, and then dissemination of that information, which then changes the reach of an event. So-called Joy Division concert. If everyone had a smartphone, for those 15 people, it would have gone a lot faster. It would have, you know, disseminated in a whole different way.
Sure, scale is still a factor, for sure.
But then it's no longer underground when you have immediate
See, that's wrong, because I'm old enough that I don't know if it's because I'm old and I don't know what the underground is, or if the underground is disseminated. I don't know. You know, but I do know the methods of disseminating information have changed
Yeah.
pretty rapidly.
I also think that's really an important point to just open up here, the question about generation.
What?
For my part, I'm an artist, and I'm also a teacher at an art academy. So I constantly meet artists who have a totally different notion of where to get knowledge about the art and the notion of history in general, but also, I mean, just producing and sharing art thought in general. So I'm constantly taught by them that we're in a totally different sphere. Like, I was trained in a time before, not only as an artist, but also as a citizen and all that. And I think that the discussion should maybe also contain a little bit of reflection about who the we are. Because if we look at you, you're all the same, and I'm the same generation per se. But sometimes when I meet very young artists, like 19 years old, they don't know what, we're not in the same sphere of understanding the post, not post, and the idea of where it goes and how. And I try to formulate it into a question to you. If you could elaborate a little bit about that. It's not like before and after in that sense, but there is some kind of difference. I notice it every day I talk with very young artists. Do you have any kind of similar idea?
Digital natives that grew up with the internet. And then we grew into it.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, from my experience, there's a lot of people who just, lot of younger artists who also see that they are just going through sort of overdose of this digital world.
Yes.
And they start to have initiatives that are pretty much similar to the stuff I was showing.
Yeah.
I was happening 25 years ago. Again, at Institut, we have quite something called the Homebrew Server Club, for instance, which is an initiative from the student there, which is a sort of informal gathering that's happening every 1 or 2 weeks to try to build up their own web infrastructure or server hosted at home. And it's not something that was pushed onto them through this courses. It's something that they brought in the academy itself. So there is, I think, generational gap, that's for sure, but I think that there is a common understanding that there is a bit of digital overdose, and that's something that I think can be shared across generations without too much difficulties.
Yeah, also personally different experience again with publications, which is trying to elaborate. It's me. Oh, sorry. Trying to elaborate a concept about publications, which we try to define as hybrid. So when you talk about generations, the major gap, I feel personally, is the attitude towards different things, especially media, especially how they negotiate their daily life with the different tools they use. How I do and how they do. But one possible approach to fill this generation gap is trying to have a hybrid approach that would include both. So it's kind of, in both parts there's a missed part of the same story. If we start talking about this missed part, sometimes it gets interesting. I mean, it's something you were also mentioning when you were saying that the analog and digital, I mean, if there was a moment where the digital seemed to be the parent to embrace, now it's not anymore, and there's a revamp of several analog technologies, which doesn't mean that, I mean, nobody sane can think about switching back to anything. But we start to think that even the digital natives start to find interest in some analog technologies. Not to switch back as a statement, but to integrate them in different processes. So this is an interesting part for me. Starting to share stories, but not as, you know, when I was doing video with videotapes was a completely different thing. But how we can take an old tape and use digital technology to mess up things with. And it's the same for in several kinds of media. But it's again, it's the interesting part. It's of course the thrill of having new possibilities, but it's also in the personal, physical relationship that can be enabled. So just to give another example, doing a residency in Eindhoven, we built a do-it-yourself book scanner. And we made an evening called the Books and Beers. Of course it was popular because of the beers, because there were free beers for everybody. But we invited people to bring one book, the book they loved most, and we promised to scan at least a chapter, and they could get home with the scanned chapter. It wasn't at all about scanning the chapter. It was about getting people around the book scanner, and they started to tell their own story why they loved that specific book. And there were great stories, and they started to connect each other, and that's why I'm pushing this small community. And the technology, in that case, the medium, became only an excuse to then gather, share cultural objects and think about interesting things to do. But it was the small group that allowed that. If we would have made an online service,
you know, nobody would have already talked about these micro-utopias in the 90s. Like, for me, I feel like you're bringing it back to the 90s. Sort of like,
it can be the case, unconsciously.
There is yes, because some of these experiments worked. So they were not utopias. They were fragile experimentation. There was fragile application of art research. Like to go kind of back to what you were saying.
I believe in bottom up, but I don't believe in the virtue of small.
No,
it's like
it's
just
it's not a thing.
To my mind.
But the small scale allowed us to make experiments, which we can't do with 2,000 followers all at once.
No, but we already have small scale. I think we have it all over.
I don't have that many. I That's it. And I don't see them.
I have my family and I have my friends over here. And I have my
No, wait. Family is different. My friends is different. I've already established emotional relationship with these people. They are not small groups. They are very well defined groups.
But it's like a reading group.
It's my fellow work, the people I work with. I already have a relationship specific with that. This is about creating small groups out of nothing, meeting persons that you want to share some experience with. It shouldn't be just a narrative, but something that could materialize something.
But I think it's about specifics. You know, I think now you are mixing oranges with lemons a bit.
I do.
No, I mean you too. Because
let's move on.
In the world of architecture, like you have these like progressive architects, and once they grow, and they always grow if they are successful, the character of their production is radically changing, and that's for sure. You know, you can't resist that. So if you want to do like specific architecture, like I don't know, on the beginning, you will never ever have a chance to go back to these like subtle, small.
You already talked about scale as loss.
It's not loss, it's a change of character.
Okay.
I don't say that they are worse or they are getting bad, but they are changing character.
But for me, this smallness is sort of like just the elitism of the art world. I cannot like. Yeah.
Is intimacy elitist?
I heard him talk with Nicolas Bourriot who invented this term relational aesthetics. A month ago, a couple of weeks ago here in Copenhagen, and he quoted Jean-Luc Godard, the French filmmaker, and he said, so art is, culture is the rule, art is the exception. And there is that exceptionalism going on. And I think that's really like old school. It was also because Jean-Luc Godard, these people, it was Nouvelle Vague filmmakers who had a problem with television also. And they had a problem with the masses and mass mediation. And for me, that's sort of like the old avant-garde game. And like, actually we talked about we talked about Rembrandt, and he wrote this article a couple of years ago, just before he died, where he passed on the stick to Kanye West. Kanye West, it was never really like underground, you know? But fucking, he has impact, you know? He has fucking impact. It's like, you know?
But also the architecture.
And it's not like going like this slowly.
The star architects have impact. What kind of impact? That's the question.
Well, I think he has a lot of good impact.
Okay.
He's a troubling figure.
Even a dictator has a lot of impact.
Oh yeah, okay.
But I'm not really interested in that.
No, I think somebody brought up the word impact earlier.
I think it's more about localization and focus than it is about elitism, though. I don't think it has to do with a closed group I think it's a better group with common interests they're trying to share within a defined set of values. It's not about saying we're the best and the coolest and nobody else can be a part of this. It's about, oh, you have this weird thing that other people can't relate to me about, and I want to share that so that you might strike me in a way that I would never strike myself, or I would never be struck by the greater internet or whatever. Like I'm having a personal interaction that makes something new happen. I don't think it's about elitism or closing people out.
To me, it's like it's a completely different paradigm. Small brewery does a different. It has a specific, affiliation to specific taste, the quality, which can't be done on the level of mass production. That's it. And it's not that we don't need to have like Duvel, or something like that, or Heineken. World needs also Heineken.
It's not mutually benign,
but there is also this like the sense of this like super small, specific, intimate.
We have two questions. One here, is that already answered?
No, I was just curious why. I may be not understanding the question so well, but I don't understand what the importance of scale is here. Why is this so important? It seems to me like it's kind of a result of an effect. And the effect is more important than the result. Some things are big, Heineken. Some things are small, like concert. And that seems like it's so important to me. You know, things that, independent of any control anybody or any groups might have, things have a size. That it just happens. Yeah.
No, but we started with the climate change, you know.
The scale grows in proportion with a sort of generalization of certain ideologies. So if you have a very small scale, you can target really precisely some sort of very, very sub-ideological interest or things that you want to share, just like you were saying, with other people, a common interest you want to explore together. The more you expand that, the more you have to deal with generalization. And with generalization, you enter the realm of more like mass ideologies, and that is basically trying to, that start to impose on others a lot of system of belief that you have to comply to, or you can, I'm not going to say the word, and that's pretty much what is left. So I think that's why the importance of scale is important, because you can be suddenly very precise in regards to your own practice, your own interest, and what is your own reflection on society. And the higher you try to generalize this, no matter what are your intentions, they can be good, then the more you're going to lose a sort of concrete or high fidelity representation of what society is.
So structures, the size of structures.
It's a different structure, yeah. And you're enabling a different structure, potentially.
Do you want to add to this?
No, to me, it's just like, you know, we have mentioned is like a huge question of, I don't know, climate change or like ecological endangerment. And with small, we don't find answer, you know. We create no impact, etc., etc. So small is for something and the big is for something else. But it is absolutely not true that scale does not matter.
Can I just add one thing, because I think that's also something like the whole idea of scale, you know, applies dramatically. If you look at something, for example, like Facebook, it's good because it's big, but that's also the reason why it's also terrible, because the size allows to hide the black box that probably does lots of illegal stuff by the laws of many European states. I mean, it's just really to have this black box that you also mentioned.
If you ask them with Facebook, there's a long list of things that can be really deeply questioned. But I think the mechanisms are even worse. The cultural mechanisms, which are then instigated and implemented on mass scale, are even worse than the black box possible. But okay.
Yeah, I have it's probably just it's just a comment or sharing thoughts on what I'm hearing here. That it seems to me that whenever you bring up the term post-internet, something happens which is very equivalent to what happens in the Danish media if you say the word art. It's always, should we have it or not? This is the kind of one of the first reactions you actually get, and it's a bit of what I'm kind of sensing is maybe is going on here also, that you're having this, you're trying to have this conversation with someone at a family party, and it never it always stops at the idea of should we do art or not, should we have it or not, I think what a lot of the post-internet, the artists that are known under the term post-internet, to me what was fascinating about them is that they kind of went beyond the question of are we fucked, and they kind of started asking questions about how is it to be fucked, or maybe starting to say what is generated by that, and actually starting to question that sea that we're swimming in, instead of asking is water a good idea, And it's not actually. I understand the idea about the micro, cosmos, and I think that a lot of the post-internet would never have been made if people weren't in very local spheres, by the way, talking to each other. So I was kind of getting confused whether this micro thing was related to conditions of production or conditions of distribution, or because those are very different questions. Just laying it out there that it's confusing. Yeah.
My point was also a little bit like talking with young artists, and I consider them as practicing art because they contribute.
Should we move on this quickly?
At academies, no, because the point is here that they are actually they are practicing what we are discussing. Maybe a little bit to what you are talking.
No, that's about the fish swimming in the sea.
I'm just a little bit older. We are fucked up, and my conversation with very young artists is about how it is to be fucked up, how to withdraw from the internet, how to not being able to get information, how not being able to be taught at all in art academies, and then still doing art, still creating microcosmos, and still being trying to negotiate if art is necessary at all, if he can change the world at all. So my point about this generation thing was not that we again should define generation gaps, but more like really listening to the very young artists in that sense that they are really practicing without having understood the history or having been experienced themselves and change of lifestyle and all those points you have put up here. But it's really interesting to reflect that idea about what the art is doing right now, seen from very young artists' perspectives, and what the art academy is. What is this for a kind of microcosmos also?
But I think we all talk with young artists very often. Right?
Yeah.
It's part of the practice.
But I'm just stressing this as maybe when we are discussing how should we put questions, I just make a remark that I hear young artists questioning every day. Very clever. Yeah.
In one of the reviews about the Berlin Biennial, Mohamed Sadimi, who's going to be on the next panel, wrote something about, and I think I kind of transcribed parts of it, so I can actually nearly quote him. He said that the Berlin Biennial was very successful at removing the distinctions between art theory, advertising, fashion, startup, and commerce, culture. And I think that's exactly like the problem that the part of the irritation comes from that when you move art into this field and you take it in a sense you're taking it out of the white cube sense of abstraction, and you move it into a wider creative field, and suddenly it becomes part of the same thing. So I think that's where suddenly when I read this, I thought, well, actually, I'm not 100% sure that this observation is absolutely correct and applies to everything. But I think in general I can follow the sentiment, and I think that would explain like a lingering sense of melancholia that I detect in lots of this work, even on the level of the shiny surfaces.
Yeah.
It's kind of in a sense, it's kind of a
neo-nostalgic.
So I actually agree, it's kind of a post-coital depression, if we're saying the fact.
But to me, I have just a small remark. I mean, we are permanently busy with like arts as a public domain, but art is not only public domain. art is also like, you know, laboratory of cultivation of language, which is happening behind the closed doors and etc. etc. So it's much larger process. I mean, of course we don't have to dig that, you know, back doors, but we have to be conscious that now we are speaking only about art as a public domain, which there's only, yeah, I don't know how big percent of the whole art context it is, but it's not the whole context.
No, it's absolutely.
And this is important because, I mean,
That's for sure.
speaking about like what is legitimate about existence of art, it's investigative and experimental impact on cultivation of language, verbal, non-verbal, linguistic, non-linguistic, etc., etc. And it always was. Actually, Richard Rorty, the American pragmaticist and super cold, whatever, his last piece is A4 as an answer to his son when he already knew, and also son knew that he's going to die. It's called Fire of Life. You can find it on internet. And his son asked him, like, okay, like, what do you feel like you missed in your life? And maybe you know that at the end of his life he turned from philosopher to literary scientist, and he refused to be called philosopher. And he said that one thing was he's missing is that he didn't make more time to be busy with verses. But poetry, verses. But there is, but he said, please, I mean, be aware that there is nothing what poetry knows and philosophy doesn't know, and vice versa. But the verse is a difference. So I think this is important thing, and with cultivation of language, we are also better people. So.
But Emmerich, you had a...
Yeah, it was just, it's slightly related to what was just discussed now, but it's to go back again to this one last time to the generational gap and what the role of the teachers and relationship with younger artists. I think the most important behavior is to basically...
It's very serious.
It's a silence.
It's ironic that it's always saying the most important behavior is.
This was the key point of the evening. Be silent, now it comes. Solution. Directly to France. As always, obstructism.
It's very hard to come back to that. No, yeah, it's the question of listening and...
What's that?
It's okay. I should have a few minutes. Yeah, to listen and to support, because I think that a younger generation of artists, there is this gap, yes, okay, but they already, I was trying to say a little bit before, a lot of them already are aware of these issues. And they respond to that slightly differently, but with way that we can still relate to them. So, for instance, very concretely, there is one example I wanted to show in the presentation, but I was running out of time. I really, didn't have time to present the works properly, but one work from one of our students called Lydia Pereira, and she wanted to address the issue of labor, free labor within Facebook. And she wanted to do that just, I think it was 2 years ago, and it's come after, I mean, really like five years of works done by media artists on Facebook, about Facebook and everything, and it felt a little bit late, you know, and I was not trying to discourage her, but to say, oh yeah, but not saying against the world, but you know, there's not much else that we can do. And she replied to me, and it really helped me also to understand what these young artists do. I don't want to leave Facebook. I have no problem with Facebook. I just want this platform to be shaped on terms that are more specific to my own needs and that to respect some of my rights. I want to be able to make it something that is usable and not purely manipulative. So there was not a discussion of complete exodus or going back to live in the forest. It was just to accept this tool for what it was, but still being able to provide a critical look on it. And the way she answered that was by basically combining these two strategies together. But she started something called the Immaterial Labor Union, which is sort of a collective, a union, in reference to union, of course, outside of Facebook, with an independent list and an independent magazine and zine that is not distributed on Facebook or on Twitter, but that talks about social networks amongst users of social networks and how they kind of share their experience. And there is a call every month for new contribution, whether it's drawings or it's sound works or text. And these things are not distributed in these social networks. They have their very specific forms. It's a mix of printed and digital publication. And I think it's really refreshing and it's really great to see that, because it's acknowledged the situation. It doesn't, it's not a pure reactionary aspect. It still embraces this notion of small scale and trying to organize together, but it does it outside of the platform it tries to decide. So I think it's a bit of something very, very positive and very encouraging, I have to say.
And it's not elitist.
No. So
it's not saying, yeah, we are the one who understand Facebook and Twitter, you know nothing about it. I mean, that's important.
There is one general thing that I've changed about generations, and there was a book published by New Museum for the exhibition called Traffic, I think, and maybe it's like 6 years ago, I don't know. And in that there is an excerpt from a sociologist who writes about generations, and it's sort of interesting because generations are diminishing at accelerating speed also, to a certain extent. But like, so he writes about the fact that earlier generation it was like child, parent, maybe 25 years old, yeah, and then how it goes down, it becomes like 20 years and 15 years and 10 years and 5 years, and now the book is that's no text actually, but something has also happened generation-wise, and it's sort and it has to do with everything that is changing at a quicker speed, distribution, availability. Like when you're talking about Joy Division, at that point there was another cultural world where you would have the punks and you would have the, what did you call them, post-punks? Yeah, post-punks, romantics, whatever. You have like all these different groups. And I think today the cultural landscape has changed completely.
Yeah.
You know? So
that's
people, that's sort of like the track being taken out of the record and onto playlists where everything is mixed.
Yeah, but for example, in America,
it starts with the scratch and all that, but like,
for example, in America, in mid-80s, this didn't
there is
work.
another sense of time. That's what I'm saying.